There is a man living on Spooner Street in Quahog, Rhode Island, who has committed welfare fraud, declared war on the United States, shot an unarmed teenager, burned down a neighbor's house, manufactured enough methamphetamine to addict an entire city, and blackmailed a family member for weeks. A judge looked at his record and called him a monster. That same judge forgot prisons existed and let him go home. His name is Peter Griffin. He has been free for 25 years. And today, we are going to go through every single thing he has done, season by season, crime by crime, and make the case that the funniest character on American television should have been behind bars before the second episode of his own show ever aired. Welcome to Red Umbrella. Let's get into it. The original crime, welfare fraud, episode 1. Here is the thing about Peter Griffin. Before he ever invaded a neighbor's yard, before he shot anyone, before he cooked meth on a farm in what was essentially a Breaking Bad episode with a laugh track, before any of that, he was already a criminal. Not in a vague, generally irresponsible kind of way. In a federally prosecutable, judge-sentenced, you are going to prison kind of way. And it happened in the very first episode of the show, January 31st, 1999, Super Bowl Sunday. Family Guy airs for the first time right after Super Bowl 33, which means the very first thing millions of people watched Peter Griffin do was commit welfare fraud. Not accidental welfare fraud either. The kind where you know something is wrong, you look at it, you think about it, and you keep the money anyway. Let's walk through exactly what happens in Death Has a Shadow, Season 1, Episode 1, because the details matter more than most people remember. Peter gets invited to a stag party at his neighbor Quagmire's house. Lois tells him not to drink. He promises not to drink. He drinks so much that he shows up to work the next morning still drunk, falls asleep at the job, and gets fired from the happy-go-lucky toy factory. His boss catches him passed out at his safety inspector post, the job where his entire responsibility was to make sure dangerous things did not happen to children. Axes, jackknives, and hazardous pills had already been packaged and sent out to kids before anyone noticed Peter was unconscious. He loses his job. He does not tell Lois. He tries several other jobs, cereal mascot, sneeze guard salesman, and fails at all of them. Brian, the family dog, eventually tells Peter to think about his family's welfare. The word welfare plants itself in Peter's brain, and he goes to the welfare office and applies for government assistance. What happens next is technically an accident, but what Peter does about it is not. A processing error at the welfare office creates a weekly check for $150,000. That is not a raise. That is not a bonus. That is a government computer making a mistake so enormous that it essentially handed one regular guy the salary of a small company every single week. Peter receives the check. He looks at it. He knows he is a man who just got fired from a toy factory. He knows what his actual financial situation is. He deposits the money. He tells Lois he got a big raise at work. Then he spends the money. He rents the statue of David. He surrounds the house with a moat to protect the family from what he describes as a Black Knight threat. He pays for collagen lip injections for Meg and Chris. He hires a jester, specifically Jerry Seinfeld, to perform at the house. He buys 6,000 chicken fajitas at a drive-thru. He spends the money the way a man spends money when he is absolutely certain it is not going to stop coming, which is to say, without any logic or restraint at all. For weeks, Peter Griffin collects and spends government welfare money that he knows does not belong to him. He keeps the checks coming. He tells no one the truth. The deception is not passive. He actively constructs a false story about being promoted and actively hides the welfare checks from his wife. This is the legal part that matters. Under federal law in the United States, knowingly retaining government money that was sent to you by mistake is a federal crime. You are not legally allowed to say it was an accident if you received the money, understood it was more than you were supposed to get, and chose to spend it rather than report the error. The moment Peter cashed that first check and decided not to tell the welfare office about the mistake, he committed fraud against the federal government. Every subsequent check he cashed after that was another count of the same crime. The show acknowledges this completely. This is not a matter of interpretation. Peter goes to trial. A judge sentences him to 24 months in federal prison. Lois shows up to the courthouse and tries to defend him by explaining that he is not a bad person, and the judge responds by sending her to jail too. The only reason Peter does not serve his sentence is that Stewie, the infant, happens to have a mind control device and uses it on the judge to get his parents released. A mind control device. Without that, Peter Griffin serves 2 years in federal prison before the show's second episode. Think about what that means for a second. The writers of Family Guy started the show by establishing, in the pilot, that their main character deserved to be imprisoned. They resolved that situation using a science fiction device operated by a baby. Every single thing Peter does after that moment happens because a toddler committed the additional crime of using an illegal mind control weapon on a sitting federal judge. Peter's freedom is not legitimate. It was manufactured by tampering with the justice system. Every season of Family Guy, every episode, every chaotic adventure, every reckless decision, all of it happens in the gap between the sentence Peter deserved and the sentence he never served. Now look at what Peter says at the very end of that episode. He tells his family he has learned his lesson. He is never going to commit welfare fraud again. He looks at the camera, he smiles, and he immediately lists the other fraudulent schemes he is now planning to pursue instead. A minority scholarship he is not qualified for, a sexual harassment suit with no real basis, and a disability claim. The show frames this as a joke, and it is funny, but it is also the character telling you, directly, in plain language, in the first 5 minutes of his entire existence on television, that his relationship with the law is not one of a person who made a mistake and learned from it. It is one of a person who got caught doing one crime and is already planning the next ones. The specifics of the welfare fraud matter because they establish something about Peter that the show never really backs away from. He is not a good man who occasionally does bad things out of stupidity. That reading is available, and it is the comfortable one, but the pilot does not actually support it. Peter drinks when he promised not to. Peter falls asleep at a job where children's safety depends on him being awake. Peter receives money he knows is wrong and keeps it. Peter lies to his wife for weeks. Peter does not come clean voluntarily. He is discovered when Lois receives the welfare check in the mail. At no point in this chain of events does Peter stop himself. There is a moment early in the episode where we see the little angel on his shoulder, the conscience figure. But the angel never shows up because he is stuck in traffic. The show plays this as a visual gag, but it is also a description of how Peter's moral decision-making works. The thing that is supposed to stop him never arrives in time. And when it does arrive, Peter has already moved on. The angel shows up too late because Peter moves too fast toward the wrong choice. That is not a character who makes mistakes. That is a character who makes decisions. There is also something worth sitting with about what Peter spends the money on. He does not pay off the house. He does not put money aside for his kids' education. He does not do any of the practical things a person might do if they suddenly came into an unexpected large sum of money. He rents a statue. He builds a moat. He hires a comedian to tell jokes in his living room. Every purchase is immediate, impulsive, and completely for Peter. His family benefits in passing. Meg gets lip injections that immediately go wrong and disfigure her face, which Lois says she deserved. But the spending is not about providing for anyone. It is about Peter experiencing the feeling of being rich. The welfare money was meant for people who genuinely needed government assistance. Peter, a recently unemployed man with a wife and 3 children, could have used legitimate help. Instead, he built a moat. When the episode reaches its crisis point and Peter has to figure out how to return the money, his solution is to dump it from a blimp at the Super Bowl. He does not return it to the welfare office. He does not contact the government. He throws it from an aircraft over a stadium full of people and creates a riot. He is shot down and arrested not for the fraud itself, but for the disruption at the Super Bowl, which is a separate crime on top of the original one. By the time Peter stands in front of a judge, he is not being sentenced for one crime. He is being sentenced for a pattern. Taking money that was not his, spending it on himself, lying about it repeatedly, and then causing a public disturbance in the process of an extremely poorly thought out attempt to fix the situation. The judge sentences him to 24 months. That is the correct outcome. That is what should have happened. It did not happen. And every episode of Family Guy that exists is evidence of what you get when a man who should be in prison keeps walking free. The welfare fraud matters as a starting point, not just because it is episode 1, but because of what it signals about every episode that comes after. Peter's crimes do not escalate from this point in a neat line. They scatter in every direction, covering different kinds of harm, different victims, different levels of severity. But they all share the same core structure as the welfare fraud. Peter identifies something he wants, takes it without proper authority, and faces no meaningful, long-term consequence. The pattern is set in the pilot. The judge says 24 months. The baby controls the judge's mind. Peter goes home. And in the very next season, he is already planning something far worse than cashing a government check he was not supposed to have. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because if you think welfare fraud is where Peter Griffin's criminal record ends, you have not been paying attention to what he does behind the wheel of a car. Section 2. Drunk driving, repeatedly and catastrophically. Peter Griffin has a favorite place. It is not his house. It is not the couch. It is a bar called the Drunken Clam on the corner of Spooner Street in Quahog, Rhode Island. And Peter treats it less like a local hangout and more like a second home that happens to serve unlimited beer and never asks him to be responsible for anything. That would be fine. Plenty of people like bars. The problem is not that Peter drinks. The problem is what Peter does after he drinks. Specifically, the problem is that Peter gets into a car. Over and over and over again. Let us start with the episode that makes this the most undeniable. Season 9, Episode 10. Friends of Peter G. It aired on February 13th, 2011, and it is one of the clearest pictures the show has ever painted of exactly how dangerous Peter Griffin is when he has been drinking and decides the solution is to drive home anyway. The episode begins with Peter and Brian causing a public disturbance at a movie theater. They are drunk, they are loud, they ruin the experience for everyone around them. As a result, a court orders both of them to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings for 30 days. This is already a significant detail. A court has recognized that Peter's drinking is a problem serious enough to require a legal mandate. He is not going to AA because he wants to. He is going because a judge told him he had to. Peter shows up to the meetings. He does not take them seriously. He sits in a room full of people who are genuinely trying to fix their lives, and he undermines every single session. He sneaks alcohol into the meetings. He passes it around. He tempts the other members into drinking with him until the entire group, people who came to those meetings specifically because alcohol had destroyed parts of their lives, are all drunk together in what was supposed to be a safe space for recovery. One man at the meeting, Greg, stands up and shares his story. He got behind the wheel of his car while completely drunk one night. He was responsible for the death of an 8-year-old girl. He tells the room this with the kind of weight a person carries when they have done something they cannot undo. Peter's response is to ask what kind of car it was. Not out of cruelty exactly, but out of a complete inability to process the seriousness of what Greg just said. Peter hears the story of a man whose drunk driving killed a child, and his brain immediately lands on the car. He is genuinely more interested in whether it was a sports car than in the fact that a little girl died. This is not a throwaway gag. It is the show putting into a single exchange everything you need to know about how Peter relates to the consequences of drunk driving. He does not connect it to himself. He does not recognize the parallel. He sits in a room where the human cost of drunk driving is being described in the most personal, devastating way possible, and it means nothing to him. Because later that same night, Peter gets into his car drunk and drives home. He falls asleep at the wheel. He crashes into a tree. He dies. Death literally shows up, as he does in the Family Guy universe, and takes Peter on a journey to show him two possible futures. One where Peter keeps drinking the way he has been drinking, and the family is destroyed. Peter becomes a violent, filthy, abusive drunk who burns his children with cigars and sleeps with his boss Angela at the brewery while everyone around him falls apart. The other future is one where Peter never drank at all, and while that version of Peter is cheerful and well-rested, he is also someone who does not know Joe or Quagmire and whose entire personality has been stripped away. Death's conclusion is not that Peter should stop drinking, it is that Peter should drink responsibly, and the show moves on. What the show does not dwell on is that in the real world, what Peter did that night, driving drunk and crashing a car, is a crime. In Rhode Island, operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol is illegal from the first offense. A first-time drunk driving charge in Rhode Island can result in up to a year in jail, a fine of up to $1,000, and a license suspension. That is for a first offense. A crash causing property damage adds additional charges. Falling asleep at the wheel while intoxicated, losing control of the vehicle, and hitting a fixed object is not a minor traffic incident. It is reckless operation of a motor vehicle while impaired, which in Rhode Island carries its own separate criminal charge on top of the DUI. Peter crashes a car while drunk and wakes up fine, and the episode ends with a lesson about moderation. But Friends of Peter G is not even the most alarming piece of evidence for this section. It is just the clearest. Because the pattern of Peter driving drunk or driving in a state that makes him dangerous to everyone on the road around him runs through the show from the very beginning and keeps running. Season 14, Episode 14, Underage Peter. It aired on February 21st, 2016. The episode opens with Peter's latest drunken incident, and this one requires description because it captures the scale of destruction Peter is capable of when alcohol is involved. Peter, drunk, attempts to drink from a fire hydrant. The force of the water knocks him across the street. He crashes through the wall of the local library. Once inside the library, he finds a copy of White Fang by Jack London, a book he was apparently assigned in 8th grade and hated, and he drowns it in the library's water fountain as revenge. This single drunken episode involves property destruction on at least two separate fronts: damage to public infrastructure in the form of the fire hydrant, and damage to a public building and its contents. In Rhode Island, willful destruction of public property is a criminal misdemeanor. Destruction of library property, which is publicly funded, adds another layer. These are real charges. They are not dramatic. They are the routine result of what Peter did that night, and the show treats them as setup for a joke about the drinking age. The joke, and it is a good joke, is that Mayor Adam West sees what Peter did and raises the legal drinking age in Quahog to 50. This means Peter, who is in his 40s, is now legally too young to drink. The humor comes from the absurdity of a grown adult being underage, but underneath the joke is the show acknowledging, through the mouth of an authority figure, that Peter's drinking caused enough public harm that the legal response was to change a law specifically because of him. One man, one night, one law changed. Peter then spends the episode finding ways around the new law, eventually getting Brian, whose dog years make him old enough, to purchase alcohol for him. Brian is arrested for supplying alcohol to someone legally underage. Peter responds to Brian's arrest by showing up at his community service, demanding Brian buy him more beer, chugging a beer in front of the man who is picking up trash on the side of the road as punishment for helping him, throwing the empty can on the ground for Brian to pick up, and then belching in his face. He does not apologize. He does not acknowledge any responsibility for Brian's situation. He asks for more beer. Now go back further. Season 5, Hell Comes to Quahog. This is the episode where Peter loses his driver's license specifically because of his behavior while driving under the influence. And the consequence is that Meg, his teenage daughter, becomes his designated driver. Peter has lost the legal right to operate a vehicle. That is the starting point of the episode. His license is gone. He cannot legally drive. What happens next is that Peter treats Meg as his personal chauffeur. He and his friends pile into the car drunk and ride around Quahog at night while tormenting Meg from the back seat. Cleveland gives her a wet willy while she is driving. Peter sets her hair on fire and laughs. He eventually puts out the fire by shaking up a beer and spraying it at her head while she is operating the vehicle at speed. Setting a driver's hair on fire while the car is moving is not a prank. It is criminal endangerment of every person in that car and every person near that road. Spraying beer on a driver's face to put out the fire you started is not a solution. It is a continuation of the same reckless, dangerous behavior with extra steps. Rhode Island criminal law covers reckless endangerment, placing another person in serious risk of physical harm through willful or reckless conduct. And what Peter does to Meg in that car qualifies without any need for a legal stretch. The episode ends with Meg having finally had enough and snapping. She rear-ends another car and gets out and physically attacks the other driver. Everyone focuses on what Meg did. Nobody charges Peter for the conditions that caused it. What makes the drunk driving pattern so significant is not any single incident. It is the accumulation. Peter drives drunk in the pilot. That is how he gets into the trouble that leads to the AA story. He drives after drinking throughout the middle seasons. He loses his license, demonstrating the law caught up with him at least once, but he continues getting rides while drunk and creating dangerous situations from the passenger seat. He crashes a car and dies in Friends of Peter G., and the lesson does not stick. No single incident here is isolated. This is a man with a documented, decade-long pattern of driving while impaired, causing property damage, endangering passengers, and facing either no consequences or consequences so light they change nothing about his behavior. In the real world, a person with Peter's driving record would not have a license. They might not have their freedom. Rhode Island, like most states, has a law specifically designed for repeat drunk driving offenders. A person who commits a third DUI offense in Rhode Island faces a mandatory minimum of 1 year in prison and a permanent license revocation. Peter has committed more than 3 drunk driving incidents on screen across the show's run. The only reason he has not accumulated those charges is that the show treats each episode as a fresh start, where the previous episode's legal consequences do not carry forward. But we are not grading on the show's internal logic here. We are looking at the totality of what Peter Griffin has done, and the totality is this. Peter Griffin has operated a motor vehicle while intoxicated on multiple documented occasions, has caused at least 1 crash that resulted in his own death from which he was supernaturally revived, has driven while his license was legally suspended, has endangered passengers including a minor child, and has shown no lasting change in behavior despite a court order, a supernatural visit from death himself, and the direct observation of what his drinking did to everyone around him at an AA meeting. The AA meeting is the part that stays with you. Peter sat in that room. He heard Greg's story about the 8-year-old girl. His brain went straight to the car. Later that night, he drove home drunk and hit a tree. Greg had to live with what he did for the rest of his life. The show made sure you understood that. The weight of it was the whole point of the scene. Peter crashed his car that same night and woke up fine, and learned to drink in moderation. He did not learn, but he woke up fine. The drunk driving is the most visible piece of Peter's criminal behavior because it is the most recurring and the most casual, treated by the show as a running characteristic rather than a serious ongoing crime. But as alarming as it is still only a crime against strangers on the road and passengers in the car. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What happens when Peter's reckless disregard for law and other people moves from the road to his own house, and specifically to his own children, is something considerably darker. And it starts, as most things with Peter do, with him being the loudest person in every room and the only one who never has to face what he has done. Section 3. Treason and the invasion of a sovereign neighbor. There is a version of this story where Peter Griffin is just a guy who wanted a swimming pool. That version is technically accurate. It starts with a tax refund, leads to a zoning dispute, and ends with Peter trying to build a backyard pool to match the one his neighbor Joe Swanson has. Simple enough. Relatable, even. Most people have looked at something a neighbor owns and wanted the same thing. But Peter Griffin does not just want the pool. Peter Griffin declares war on the United States of America. Season 2, Episode 18, E Peterbus Unum. It aired on July 12, 2000, and it is one of the most legally dense episodes in the entire run of Family Guy, which is a strange sentence to type about a cartoon where a man declares himself president of his own backyard. But the episode walks through every step of what Peter does with enough specificity that the crimes are not ambiguous, they are just absurd. And absurd does not mean legal. Here is what actually happens. Peter's neighbors are all getting tax refunds and spending them on things for themselves. Cleveland gets something, Quagmire gets something, Joe gets something. Peter goes to get his own tax refund and gets audited by the IRS instead, meaning not only does he not get money back, but the government is now looking at his finances. He is denied the refund entirely. He decides to build a pool himself, rather than buy one with refund money he does not have. He starts digging in the backyard. While digging, he accidentally cuts through a power line, knocking out electricity for the area. A man from the power company arrives and tells Peter that the town's zoning rules do not allow him to build a pool on his property. Peter goes to see Mayor Adam West to try to get a permit. This is where the episode pivots into something genuinely unusual. Mayor West looks through the town's zoning records and discovers that due to a cartographic error made at some point in Quahog's history, the Griffin family's property was never officially recorded as part of the town. It is not on the map. Technically, legally, within the logic of the show, Peter's house exists in a zone that is not part of Quahog, which means it is also not part of the state of Rhode Island, which means it is also not part of the United States. Peter's immediate response to this information is to declare independence. He announces that from that moment forward, his property is a sovereign nation. He names it Pretoria. He tried to name it Peterland first, but as he explains to his family, that name was already taken by a bar near the airport. So Pretoria it is. Peter Griffin, unemployed safety inspector and convicted welfare fraudster, is now the self-declared president of a nation consisting of one house and a front yard in Quahog, Rhode Island. He prints currency. He writes a national anthem. He shows up at the United Nations to claim Pretoria's seat among the world's nations and is laughed out of the building. No country recognizes Pretoria as legitimate. No diplomat takes him seriously. Peter sits in the nosebleed section of the UN, interrupts the session, and demands a better seat because he is a head of state. Nobody gives him one. This is the point where a reasonable person, even a reasonably unreasonable person, would go home and accept that the zoning technicality does not actually make you a country. Peter Griffin is not that person. At the UN, an Iraqi diplomat approaches Peter and gives him advice. The diplomat tells Peter that the way to earn respect on the world stage is not to ask for it. It is to take what you want. If you want power, seize something. Make them acknowledge you. Peter listens to this advice and follows it immediately and completely. He goes home. He looks at Joe Swanson's pool next door, and he annexes it. Peter Griffin invades his neighbor's backyard and formally declares Joe's pool the Praetorian province of Johio. He does not ask. He does not negotiate. He walks over to Joe's property, claims it in the name of Pretoria, and begins holding pool parties there with foreign rulers he has apparently made contact with at the UN. Joe, his wife Bonnie, and their son are now inside the borders of a country they did not consent to live in. The United States government responds. Operation Desert Clam is launched. The military surrounds the Griffin house, now Pretoria, with tanks and missiles. The army blockades the entire property. Electricity is cut off. Gas is cut off. Water is cut off. Lois has to homeschool the children because Chris cannot get through the military perimeter to go to school. Peter holds a press conference. He plays Peter Griffin Bump Can't Touch Me, a parody of the MC Hammer song, in front of news cameras. He refuses to negotiate. He holds on to Johio even as his family runs out of water and food and basic necessities inside what is now a blockaded territory. Lois eventually takes the children and leaves, crossing back into the United States and abandoning Peter to his blockaded nation. At that point, Peter is alone in Pretoria with Brian, facing the military might of the United States government over a pool he did not own and a country nobody recognized. He eventually surrenders. He signs an agreement to give Joe's pool back and repatriate Pretoria into the United States. The whole thing lasted less than a week. The episode ends with the reveal that the entire story has been turned into a social studies lesson shown to school children 200 years in the future, which is the show's way of acknowledging that what Peter did was historically significant enough to be taught in classrooms. Now let us talk about what Peter actually did. The annexation of Joe's pool is the most serious act. Peter physically occupied the private property of a United States citizen and declared it part of a foreign nation. He did not do this by accident. He was advised to do it, he thought about it, and he walked over and did it. Joe Swanson, a police officer, had his property seized by a self-declared foreign government operating out of the house next door. Under United States law, the seizing of private American property by a foreign power or entity is not a civil matter. It touches on federal territory. But more directly, Peter's actions before the annexation, the Declaration of Independence, the diplomatic immunity abuse, the refusal to comply with a military blockade, all fall under the broad category of actions against the United States government. Here is the part the show plays as background noise, but which is actually worth stopping on. While Peter has diplomatic immunity as the self-declared head of state of Pretoria, he uses that immunity to commit a list of smaller crimes. He takes beer from a bar without paying for it. He writes graffiti on public property. He jaywalks. He urinates in public. He commits these crimes openly and dares anyone to stop him, because as head of state, he cannot be touched. Diplomatic immunity in the real world is a protection given to genuine foreign diplomats to allow them to operate in other countries without fear of local legal prosecution. It is not a thing Peter Griffin has. Pretoria is not a recognized nation. No government on Earth acknowledged it. The Iraqi diplomat at the UN was giving Peter advice, not diplomatic credentials. Peter does not have immunity. He has a delusion of immunity, and he uses that delusion to commit multiple crimes in public while announcing that nobody can touch him. The graffiti alone is a misdemeanor in Rhode Island. The public urination is a misdemeanor. The theft of the beer is petty theft. None of these charges are massive individually. Together, they are a man committing crimes specifically because he believes he is above the law, which under Rhode Island statute is exactly the kind of pattern of conduct that leads to enhanced sentencing. But the annexation is the real charge. Rhode Island law on trespassing and unlawful occupation of private property covers exactly what Peter did to Joe's yard. Entering the private property of another person and refusing to leave when asked is criminal trespass. Declaring that property part of a separate governing entity and holding it against the will of its owner escalates that into something more serious: forcible detainer of real property, which in Rhode Island is a criminal offense. Joe Swanson is a police officer. His family was essentially held inside the borders of a country they did not want to be in. Bonnie and the kids could not leave freely because Peter had declared the pool and surrounding area part of Pretoria. Their freedom of movement was restricted by Peter's actions. That is not a stretch. That is unlawful confinement of another person's family on their own property. And the United States military had to be deployed to resolve it. The American government sent tanks, missiles, a full military blockade. Operation Desert Clam is presented in the episode as a parody of real-world military operations, which it is, but the parody works because the underlying structure is real. A civilian has seized private property and refused government authority, and the government has responded with force. The fact that the civilian is Peter Griffin and the property is a backyard pool does not change the legal nature of what happened. It just makes it funnier. What is not funny, legally speaking, is that Peter was advised to do this by a foreign diplomat at the United Nations. Following the advice of a foreign government official to seize American land is exactly the kind of thing that triggers federal charges that go well beyond trespassing. Receiving and acting on counsel from a foreign power to take hostile action against American citizens and American territory sits in a category of offenses that American law treats with extreme seriousness. Peter was not thinking about any of that. Peter heard someone tell him that power comes from taking what you want, and he went home and took a pool. The episode resolves tidily. Peter surrenders. The pool goes back to Joe. Peter repatriates Pretoria. The military leaves. Joe and Peter are apparently fine. Nobody is charged with anything. The whole thing gets filed away as one of Peter's bits, the kind of outrageous scheme that the show cycles through every few episodes and then forgets entirely. But here is what the episode actually established. Peter Griffin, when given a legal technicality that he believed exempted him from normal rules, immediately used that exemption to seize private property, abuse diplomatic protections, commit multiple public crimes, and force the United States military to blockade his home. That is not a man who made a mistake. That is a man who showed you exactly what he would do if he thought he could get away with it. And the answer to what Peter Griffin would do if he thought he could get away with it is apparently invade his neighbor, annex a pool, and hold a party for foreign dignitaries while the army surrounds his house. The show framed this as Peter wanting a pool. That is true. But a man who responds to being denied a zoning permit by declaring war on his own country and occupying civilian property is not a man with a pool problem. He is a man with a law problem. A deep, structural, this is just how he operates law problem that started with welfare fraud in episode 1 and was already, by season 2, escalating into military-level consequences. The pool was never really about the pool. It was about Peter's relationship with rules he does not like, which has always been the same. If the rule is inconvenient, Peter finds a reason it does not apply to him. Sometimes the reason is a government processing error, sometimes it is a zoning technicality, sometimes it is advice from a foreign diplomat at the United Nations. The destination is always the same. Peter does what he wants. Everyone around him pays for it. And by the time the dust settles, the show has already moved on to the next episode. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What comes next in Peter's criminal history involves not a foreign nation, not a government office, not a pool, but his own daughter. And the evidence there is not a single episode. It is every episode, across more than 2 decades, building a picture of abuse so consistent and so well documented that no amount of laugh track can cover what it actually is. Section 4. Child Endangerment and the Abuse of Meg Griffin. Most of what Peter Griffin does wrong happens in a single episode. He commits a crime, the episode ends, and the next week, everything resets. The welfare fraud was 1 episode. The invasion of Pretoria was 1 episode. The drunk driving incidents are spread out but still contained, individual moments that the show moves past. The abuse of Meg Griffin is not like that. It is not 1 episode. It is not a phase. It is not something the show accidentally let get out of hand and then corrected. The mistreatment of Meg Griffin by her father Peter is a continuous, documented, multi-season pattern that begins in the very first episode of the show and runs through decades of television. It is the most sustained evidence of criminal behavior in Peter's entire record, because it never stops. Other crimes Peter commits have a beginning and an end. What he does to Meg just keeps going. Let us start at the actual beginning, because most people remember the Meg abuse as a later seasons thing, a Flanderization that crept in after the show got darker and lazier. That is not accurate. It starts in Season 1, Episode 1, Death Has a Shadow, the pilot, the very first episode. Peter comes home after the events of the welfare fraud storyline, and, in what is presented as a casual moment, grounds Meg for touching the thermostat. Not for doing something dangerous, not for causing harm, for adjusting the temperature in the house. Peter punishes his teenage daughter in the first episode of the show for a normal, harmless act, and the show frames it as a quick joke before moving on. Also in that same episode, Peter spends welfare money on cosmetic surgery for his children. He gets collagen lip injections for Meg. The injections immediately go wrong and disfigure her face. Lois's response, when Meg asks for help fixing it, is to say she deserved it. This is episode 1. Meg has been on screen for approximately 10 minutes and has already been physically harmed by her father's reckless spending and dismissed by her mother when she asks for help. The second episode of the show is called I Never Met the Dead Man, and in it, Peter tells Meg directly that her birth was a disappointment to him. She has been in 2 episodes. Her father has already told her he wishes she had not been born. This is where the pattern starts, and it does not stop. Season 4 is where the physical abuse becomes more specific and more frequent. The Tan Aquatic with Steve Zissou is a Season 4 episode in which Peter shoves Meg's face into his backside and farts directly into it. This is not a quick cutaway gag. It is a scene. It is Peter deliberately using his daughter's face as the target of a fart, not because she did anything, not as any kind of punishment with even a twisted logic to it, but because he can. Meg has no recourse. She cannot stop him. Nobody in the family intervenes. This scene is revisited and repeated. In Bango Was His Name-O, Peter locks Meg in the car and forces her to smell his farts. He tells her it is the sexiest thing a woman can do for a man. Which means he is not just physically tormenting her, he is also saying something deeply inappropriate to his own teenage daughter about what women owe men. In Call Girl, Peter's goodbye to Meg is a slow fart directly in her face. The show returns to this specific form of abuse repeatedly across multiple seasons, which means it is not an accident or a one-off. It is a chosen, recurring element of how Peter relates to his daughter. Now look at the hair. Season 5, Hell Comes to Quahog. Meg is driving because Peter has lost his license, which, as discussed in Section 2, happened because of his drunk driving. Peter, drunk in the back seat, sets Meg's hair on fire while she is driving the car. He watches it burn. He finds it funny. He eventually puts it out by shaking up a beer and spraying it at her head. Meg is driving a moving vehicle. Her hair is on fire. Her father set it on fire. Her father is laughing. Under Rhode Island law, setting fire to another person, even if the fire is eventually put out, constitutes assault causing bodily harm. Doing this to your own child constitutes child abuse under Rhode Island general laws, which defines abuse as any physical harm or threatened harm to a child by a parent. There is no version of this that is not criminal. The hair was literally on fire. The driver of the car had her hair on fire. This happened because Peter thought it would be funny. And then there is the mumps. In a Season 5 episode, the Griffin family attends what is essentially a large convention. Peter spots a man whose appearance he finds unusual and tells Meg to go stand next to him and take a picture. He thinks the man is in a costume. The man has mumps. Meg contracts mumps from direct contact with an infected person at her father's instruction. By the next day, she is bedridden, swollen, and in serious pain. The doctor informs the family that Meg was never vaccinated against mumps. When asked why she was not vaccinated, Peter explains that he does not love her enough to get her vaccinated. He says this out loud, to a doctor, about his sick, bedridden, unvaccinated daughter who got sick because he told her to stand next to the infected man. Failure to vaccinate a child in the United States is a parental responsibility issue. Rhode Island law requires children to receive certain vaccinations, and a parent who willfully refuses to provide those vaccinations is in violation of that requirement. Peter did not just fail to vaccinate Meg. He actively directed her toward an infected person and then explained his failure to protect her health as a function of how much he cares about her, which is not at all. Then the family, knowing Meg is sick and in pain, uses her illness as an opportunity to play pranks on her. Peter throws soup on her. Stewie and Chris physically torment her while she is bedridden. Nobody helps her recover. Her sickness is treated by her own family as entertainment. The Petergeist episode. The family discovers their house is built on a Native American burial ground. Peter finds a skull. Rather than treat it with any respect or contact the appropriate authorities, Peter uses the skull as a bowl to eat out of, urinates in it, and tosses it around the house. His disrespect of the burial site causes supernatural events that eventually result in Stewie being pulled into another dimension. The family discovers that the portal to retrieve Stewie exists inside Meg's body, specifically through her backside. Before making any serious effort to get Stewie back, Peter and the rest of the family spend time using Meg's body as a novelty, throwing objects through the portal, watching them come out the other side, treating their daughter and sister as a carnival attraction. Meg is a person. They are using her body as a toy. Ratings Guy, Season 11. The Griffin family visits a fire station. During the visit, Peter and Lois share memories of each child's first visit to a fire station. The cutaway shows Meg's first visit. Peter and Lois are attempting to leave Meg there, to abandon her as an infant at the fire station. They are not surrendering her to adoption services. They are not going through any official process. They are trying to leave their baby at a fire station and walk away. They are caught and turned back. But the attempt happened. Abandoning an infant is a criminal act in Rhode Island. The state has a safe haven law that allows parents to surrender a newborn within a specific number of days at designated safe locations, but that law applies to newborns and requires the child to be surrendered directly to staff. What the flashback depicts is not a safe surrender. It is a couple trying to leave their baby somewhere and quietly disappear. That is abandonment. That is a felony. And Peter remembers it fondly as a funny story he tells at a fire station. Seahorse Seashell Party is a Season 10 episode, and it is one of the most important pieces of evidence in this entire section. The episode takes place during a hurricane. The family is stuck inside together with no television. Unable to go anywhere and unable to distract themselves, the family turns on Meg. They mock her, belittle her, and pile abuse on her the way they always do. Except this time, Meg has reached a breaking point, and she fights back. She tells them the truth. She looks at Chris and tells him he is a terrible brother. She looks at Lois and tells her she has been a neglectful, self-absorbed mother. She looks at Peter and tells him the truth about what kind of father he has been. She is specific. She is articulate. Every single thing she says is something the show has shown the audience across 10 seasons of episodes. Peter and Lois and Chris respond by turning their anger on each other. The family falls apart in real time because without Meg to absorb their dysfunction, without a target to point at, they have nobody to blame but themselves. The episode ends with Meg choosing to take the abuse back. She apologizes to the family. She tells them she is the lightning rod. She absorbs their anger so it does not destroy them from the inside. This is the show explaining its own mechanics in plain language. The Meg abuse is not random cruelty. It is structural. The family needs a target. Meg became that target. And when she refuses to be the target, the family cannot function. Peter hears his daughter explain that she has chosen to absorb years of abuse in order to protect the family from themselves, and his response is to accept it. He does not refuse it. He does not say that is not how things are going to work anymore. He accepts the deal. Meg takes the punishment. The family stays together. Under Rhode Island child abuse law, the definition of abuse includes not only physical harm, but also emotional abuse, willful acts or omissions that result in serious emotional harm to a child. The show spent 10 seasons building a case study of exactly that. Meg has been told she was a disappointing birth. She has been told she is not loved enough to be vaccinated. She has had her hair set on fire. She has been used as a human whoopee cushion. Her parents tried to abandon her as an infant. She has been the target of relentless verbal cruelty across hundreds of episodes. And in Seahorse Seashell Party, the show reveals that everyone in the family, including Meg, is aware this is happening and has chosen to continue it anyway. Peter is the father. He is the adult in the house. He is the person legally responsible for the well-being of his children. Rhode Island law places the responsibility for a child's safety and health on the parents. Peter has not only failed that responsibility, he has been the primary source of the harm. The abuse of Meg is not something that snuck into the show by accident. It is a deliberate, written, recurring element of Peter's character that spans every era of the show. Early seasons, middle seasons, later seasons. The specific forms change. Some episodes are more physical, some are more verbal, but the fundamental relationship between Peter and Meg never changes. He is the father, she is the target. And the show keeps giving him new ways to make her life worse. Peter Griffin has committed federal crimes. He has declared war on his own country. He has driven drunk on multiple documented occasions. But the abuse of Meg Griffin is the crime that required no single dramatic moment. It built itself across 20 years of small cruelties, casual dismissals, physical harm, and a father who told a doctor, without shame, that he did not love his daughter enough to get her vaccinated. That is the record. That is what the evidence shows. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And if everything you have read in this section sounds bad, and it should, then you are going to have a very specific reaction to the next section, because it covers the day Peter Griffin got his hands on a gun and pointed it at a person he could not even be bothered to identify first. Section 5. Unauthorized discharge of a firearm. Shooting Cleveland Jr. There is a specific kind of dangerous that Peter Griffin represents, and it is not the loud, obvious kind. It is not the kind where you can see it coming from a mile away and step out of the road. It is the kind where everything seems fine right up until the moment it very much is not. And by the time you realize what has happened, someone is already in the hospital. Season 14, Episode 9. A Shot in the Dark. It aired on December 13th, 2015, and it is one of the most legally clear episodes in the entire run of Family Guy. Not because the show plays it straight, it does not. It is still a comedy, but because the facts of what Peter does in this episode are so specific and so well documented within the episode itself that there is almost no interpretive work required. You just describe what happens, and the crime describes itself. It starts with a couch. Peter has his couch moved outside. He and his friends, Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland, sit outside on the couch and drink. This becomes their new routine. The outdoor couch is their hangout spot. Then the couch gets stolen. Someone takes it in the night and it is gone, and Peter is furious. The loss of the couch becomes the motivation for what happens next. Peter decides the neighborhood needs protection. He wants to form a neighborhood watch, a group of civilians who patrol the area and keep an eye out for crime. Joe Swanson, who is an actual police officer with actual training and actual knowledge of the law, tells the group directly that civilians in a neighborhood watch cannot carry guns. This is not ambiguous. Joe is a cop. He knows what the rules are. He states them clearly. Civilians on a neighborhood watch do not get to arm themselves. Peter obtains several guns anyway. How Peter gets the guns after a police officer explicitly told him he could not have them is not dwelt on by the episode, but the fact that he gets them is central to everything that follows. Peter was told no. Peter decided that no did not apply to him. This is the same logic that led to Pretoria, the same logic that led to keeping the welfare money, the same logic that operates every time Peter encounters a rule he finds inconvenient. The rule exists, Peter ignores it, someone else pays the price. Peter begins patrolling the neighborhood at night with his illegally obtained firearm. He is not trained, he is not authorized, he has been explicitly told he should not be doing this. He does it anyway because the couch was stolen and he is angry about it. One night, Peter is outside on patrol. He spots a shadowy figure near Cleveland's house. The figure appears to be trying to get into the house through a window, climbing up toward it, reaching for the frame, trying to get inside. Peter does not call out loudly enough to be heard. He does not call Joe, who is an actual police officer and who lives right there on the street. He does not turn on a light or make noise to scare the person off. He fires his weapon at the shadowy figure. The person he shoots is Cleveland Brown Jr. Cleveland Jr. is Cleveland's son. He is a teenager. He was not breaking into the house. He was trying to get back into his own house through the window because his father Cleveland had told him not to open the front door. Cleveland did not want to let the air conditioning out. Cleveland Jr. had been outside, came home, found the front door off limits per his father's instructions, and was climbing in through the window the way any teenager would when the front door is not an option. He was wearing headphones. He could not hear Peter approaching or calling out because he had music playing in his ears. Peter shot him. Cleveland Jr. is taken to the hospital. Peter arrives at the hospital and meets the Brown family, Cleveland, his wife Donna, and the rest of the kids. Cleveland and Donna are furious. They accuse Peter of being racist. They believe, based on what happened, that Peter shot their son because their son is black. Cleveland goes on television and gives an interview to news anchor Tom Tucker, publicly stating that the shooting was a hate crime and demanding that the city of Quahog treat it as one. Joe, as a police officer, investigates and determines that the shooting was accidental, that Peter genuinely mistook Cleveland Jr. for a burglar and fired out of misguided panic rather than racial hatred. Joe tells Cleveland this. Cleveland does not accept it. The community does not accept it. The Griffin family becomes the target of public anger across Quahog. People turn on them in the street. The family becomes isolated and afraid. Peter, in response to this situation, decides the best way to prove he is not racist is to paint himself brown and go to the center of town. He announces this plan to Lois before doing it. Lois, who has tolerated an extraordinary amount from Peter over many years, completely loses her composure. She grabs a rolled-up magazine and starts beating Peter with it, screaming at him. She is not wrong to do so. The plan is so catastrophically stupid that even by Peter's standards, it represents a new low in crisis management. He does not do the blackface. Lois stops him. But the fact that his first instinct was to paint himself a different skin color as a response to being accused of a racially motivated shooting tells you everything you need to know about Peter's judgment under pressure. The case goes to court. This is where things get worse, because Peter's legal defense is provided by Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's enormously wealthy father, and Carter's lawyer proceeds to destroy Cleveland Jr. on the stand. The lawyer implies that Cleveland Jr.'s music choices connect him to criminal behavior. The lawyer points out that Cleveland Jr.'s last name is Brown, the same as the singer Chris Brown, and uses this to suggest Cleveland Jr. is inherently violent. The lawyer tricks Cleveland Jr. into picking up a knife during questioning, making it appear to the courtroom that he is threatening and dangerous. Cleveland Jr.'s testimony before this attack had reduced the entire room to tears. He was honest, clear, and deeply sympathetic. Carter's lawyer dismantled all of that through tactics that are not legal in an actual courtroom, coaching a witness into holding a potential weapon, using irrelevant name associations to imply criminal character, and making arguments that have no factual basis. Peter objects to what the lawyer is doing. He stands up and says this is wrong. It is one of the few moments in this section of the episode where Peter demonstrates something approaching a conscience. But he objects too late. The damage is done. Outside the courthouse, Cleveland confronts Peter and tells him their friendship is over. He is done with Peter. The community has turned on the Brown family too now, following the lawyer's courtroom performance. There is an angry crowd outside Cleveland's house. Cleveland comes out to face them. Peter walks into the middle of it. He tells the crowd and the assembled media that he did shoot Cleveland Jr. He says it clearly. He takes responsibility. He says he will face whatever consequences come from it. This is genuinely the most honest and accountable Peter is at any point in this entire episode. Cleveland immediately jumps in and claims that he shot his own son. He tells the crowd that a black man shot a black man. The crowd, which had been energized by the idea of racial injustice, loses interest instantly and disperses. The joke the episode is making about selective public outrage is sharp and deliberate. But the legal situation underneath the joke is worth examining on its own. Peter shot an unarmed teenager. Let us be specific about what that means under Rhode Island law. Rhode Island General Laws Section 1147-51 covers the reckless use of a firearm. Discharging a firearm in a way that creates a substantial risk of death or serious physical harm to another person is a felony in Rhode Island. Peter fired a gun at a person he had not properly identified, in the dark, without confirming who or what he was shooting at. He hit Cleveland Jr., a teenager, in his own yard, listening to a Hanukkah album on his headphones. The fact that Peter believed he was shooting at a burglar does not eliminate the criminal charge. Reckless discharge of a firearm does not require intent to harm. It requires reckless behavior that causes harm. Peter's behavior was reckless by every standard. He had a gun he was not legally authorized to carry. He was patrolling without any official authority or training. He fired at a target he had not identified, and his failure to identify the target resulted in a teenage boy being shot. Beyond the reckless discharge charge, there is also the matter of how Peter came to have the gun at all. Joe told him, explicitly and as a law enforcement officer, that civilians in a neighborhood watch could not carry firearms. Peter got guns anyway. Carrying an unauthorized firearm while participating in a self-appointed patrol operation is not a gray area. Rhode Island has specific laws governing who can carry firearms and under what circumstances. Peter met none of those requirements. He had an illegal firearm. He used it. He shot someone. The unauthorized carrying alone is a separate criminal charge from the shooting. And then Peter tried to make it worse by setting Cleveland's house on fire, but that gets its own section later because it deserves the full attention. What is worth focusing on here is the shape of the thing. Peter wanted to protect the neighborhood because his outdoor couch got stolen. That is the origin of all of this. A piece of outdoor furniture went missing, and Peter's response was to arm himself, ignore a police officer's direct instructions, and begin patrolling the streets at night. The couch cost maybe a few $100s. The chain of events that followed it included a teenager being shot, a family being terrorized by public accusations, a corrupt court proceeding that slandered an innocent kid, and a friendship nearly destroyed. All of it traces back to a couch. Peter does not make small mistakes. When Peter decides to do something, the consequences expand outward in every direction and keep expanding long after Peter has stopped thinking about what started it. The couch was stolen. Peter got a gun. Cleveland Jr. got shot. The Brown family got dragged through a public accusation. Their son got slandered in court. The crowd outside their house came close to running them out of their neighborhood. Cleveland Jr., before he leaves at the end of the episode, tells Peter quietly that he is coming for him. He says it with the specific weight of someone who has not forgotten what happened, even if the adults around him have decided to pretend everything is fine. Cleveland Jr. is a teenager who was shot in his own yard while listening to holiday music, and then had his character destroyed in court while trying to tell the truth about it. His threat is delivered as a joke, and then immediately undercut by him laughing it off, but the laugh does not quite land clean. The The show moves on. It always moves on. But Cleveland Jr. is out there in the Family Guy universe carrying a bullet he should not have, from a gun Peter should not have had, fired on the authority of a neighborhood watch that Peter was specifically told he could not arm. And the gun was just the most dramatic thing Peter did in that episode. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because there is another crime in Peter's file that did not require a weapon or a confrontation or even another person to be present. It required something far simpler. Access to something that was not his, a decision to take it anyway, and a system that handed him just enough power to do serious damage before anyone thought to check his work. Section 6. Federal Lobbying Fraud and Conspiracy to Promote Underage Smoking. Most of the crimes in Peter Griffin's file involve Peter doing something reckless in the heat of the moment. He drinks too much and drives home. He gets angry about a couch and grabs a gun. He finds a zoning loophole and declares himself a world leader. These are impulsive crimes. Bad decisions made fast, without much thought, by a man who does not think much. This one is different. Season 3, Episode 3, Mr. Griffin Goes to Washington. It aired on July 25th, 2001, and it is the episode where Peter Griffin becomes the paid representative of a company whose entire business strategy involves getting children addicted to cigarettes. He goes to Washington. He speaks to Congress. He lobbies on behalf of a tobacco company targeting kids. And the show, to its credit, eventually has him do the right thing, but not before documenting in considerable detail exactly how far Peter was willing to go in service of people who were actively harming children. Here is what happens. Peter is almost fired from the happy-go-lucky toy factory for skipping work to go to a Red Sox game at Fenway Park. He lies to his boss, Mr. Weed, to get out of going to work, telling him over the phone that he was in a terrible plane crash and that his entire family was killed. This is the excuse he uses. My family is dead and I am in a plane crash. He then shows up at the game, runs into Mr. Weed in the stands, and tells him that the man Mr. Weed saw at the game was his identical twin brother. 3 separate lies in one work avoidance scheme. Peter is a committed and creative liar when it serves him. Then, the El Dorado Cigarette Company buys the toy factory. The new owners look at their situation and decide they need someone to go to Washington and convince Congress to vote against a bill that would restrict tobacco advertising. They need a lobbyist, someone who can talk to politicians and make their case. They decide that the best person to communicate with Congress is someone just as uninformed as the people they are trying to persuade. They look around the company and they land on Peter. They make him president of the toy company, not because he earned it, not because he is qualified, but because they need someone easy to control and easy to use. The promotion comes with perks designed to keep Peter happy and distracted. A personal assistant whose entire job is to agree with everything Peter says, Martha Stewart sent to help Lois around the house, and various other gifts that successfully stop Lois from asking too many questions about what her husband is actually doing at work. Brian is not distracted. Brian sees immediately what the company is doing and pledges to quit smoking in protest. Brian understands the situation. Peter does not, or chooses not to. The toys that El Dorado is producing through the factory are designed specifically to make children want to smoke. The company is using the toy factory as a way to put smoking-related products in the hands of kids, building a future customer base by targeting the youngest and most easily influenced consumers available. This is not a gray area. This is a company using a children's toy business to run an advertising campaign aimed at getting kids addicted to tobacco, and Peter is their chosen representative. Peter goes to Washington as a paid lobbyist for this company, lying to Congress, giving false or misleading testimony to the people who make the country's laws, is a federal crime in the United States. It is called perjury, and it carries a sentence of up to 5 years in federal prison. A lobbyist who makes false claims to Congress on behalf of the company paying them is not just lying. They are doing so in service of a commercial interest, which adds additional layers of legal exposure. Peter does not think about any of this. He is good at talking to the politicians because, as the episode frames it, he is just as confused and easily distracted as they are. He finds common ground with Congress not through policy knowledge or persuasion skill, but through shared bewilderment. He is effective as a lobbyist for the worst possible reason. He fits in. The episode also contains a flashback, not a hypothetical, not a dream sequence, a flashback presented as a factual part of Peter's history. In 1991, during the confirmation hearings for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, Peter gave false testimony. He was caught lying on the stand. When his lies were exposed, his response was to start screaming nonsense into the microphone until the hearing dissolved into chaos. False testimony given under oath in a federal proceeding is perjury. It does not matter that the scene is played for laughs. The show presents it as something Peter actually did. Peter Griffin perjured himself before the United States Senate during one of the most watched confirmation hearings in American history, and apparently faced zero consequences for it. That flashback is not a throwaway gag. It is a data point. It tells you that Peter's willingness to lie to government institutions under oath goes back at least to 1991, that he has done it before the events of Mr. Griffin Goes to Washington, and that he has never been held accountable for it. Back in the present timeline of the episode, the situation at home is getting worse. Stewie, the infant, has gotten hold of a cigarette and is smoking it. Lois sees this and realizes the full picture of what her husband's new job is producing. She takes the children and goes to Washington to confront Peter. Peter, in the middle of preparing to deliver his speech to Congress on behalf of El Dorado, hears Stewie coughing in the back of the chamber. He sees his baby son, who has been smoking because the company Peter works for put tobacco products within reach of a child, and something shifts. He stands in front of Congress and tells them to reject El Dorado's proposal. He blows up his own lobbying assignment in the middle of delivering it. Congress responds by fining El Dorado $100 million for promoting underage smoking, which bankrupts the company. Peter did the right thing in the end. The show gives him that. But doing the right thing at the end does not erase what came before it. Peter accepted a job he knew was built on deceiving Congress. He went to Washington as a paid representative of a company whose product strategy involved addicting children to cigarettes. He used the platform they gave him to influence federal lawmakers. He had already perjured himself before Congress once in his life. He accepted gifts, including sending Martha Stewart to manage his wife, specifically designed to prevent anyone in his family from asking what he was actually doing. All of that happened before the change of heart. The crime is not just the lobbying. The crime is the acceptance of benefits in exchange for using government access to serve a company's illegal agenda. That is a bribery structure. The company gave Peter and his family gifts and perks to buy his cooperation. Peter accepted them and cooperated. Rhode Island and federal law both cover this kind of arrangement. Receiving things of value in exchange for using influence in a government process is a crime, regardless of whether the person doing it holds an official position. Peter was not a government official. He was a private citizen who had been given the title of company president specifically so he could be used as a lobbying tool. That does not make the arrangement legal. It makes it a private citizen accepting bribes to do the bidding of a tobacco company before Congress. He was effective enough that Congress nearly voted the way El Dorado wanted. The only thing that stopped Peter was seeing his infant son coughing from cigarette smoke in the back of a congressional chamber. Remove that moment. If Lois had not brought Stewie to Washington, if Stewie had not been visibly affected, if Peter had not looked up and seen his baby in the room, and Congress passes the bill, El Dorado wins. Children across the country are more exposed to tobacco advertising designed for their age group. Peter never changes his mind. One coughing baby in the back of a room is the difference between Peter Griffin accidentally doing the right thing and Peter Griffin completing a federally criminal lobbying operation on behalf of a company targeting children. That is not a comfortable margin. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And if you think accepting bribes from a tobacco company to lobby Congress is the most cynical thing Peter Griffin ever did in a professional setting, if you think that is the floor, then you have not yet heard about what Peter did when someone handed him a position of power, and he realized it meant he could do absolutely anything he wanted without being stopped. Section 7. Disability Fraud and Framing an Innocent Man for Prostitution. There is a question that comes up when you spend enough time going through Peter Griffin's criminal record. The question is this: does Peter do bad things because he is stupid, or does he do bad things because he has decided the rules do not apply to him? Season 4, Episode 6 answers that question directly. Petarded. It aired on June 19, 2005, and it is the episode that removes any remaining doubt about which of those two things is true. Because in Petarded, Peter is handed a medical diagnosis that is supposed to explain his behavior as a function of limited intelligence. And within approximately 48 hours, he has turned that diagnosis into a tool for committing crimes he was previously too accountable to get away with. Here is what happens. The Griffin family has their neighbors over for game night. They are playing Trivial Pursuit. Lois, wanting Peter to feel good about himself, secretly swaps his question cards with cards from the preschool edition, the version designed for very small children, so that Peter can answer the questions and feel smart. Peter answers his easy questions, wins his rounds, and becomes convinced he is a genius. Brian,
tired of Peter's arrogance after the game, challenges him to take a real intelligence test to prove it. Peter agrees. He takes the MacArthur Fellows Program test, which is a test designed to measure genuine, high-level intelligence. The results come back. Peter does not just fail to qualify as a genius. The results show that Peter's intelligence level falls just below the line for what the medical and legal system defines as an intellectual disability. The doctor shows Peter a graph. Peter's name is at the bottom. Peter is officially, medically, and legally classified as intellectually disabled. He sinks into depression about this for a very short time. Then, something happens that changes everything. While driving home with Lois, Peter accidentally knocks down Tom Tucker, the news anchor. Tucker is initially furious. Then he looks up, recognizes Peter as the man who has just been publicly identified as intellectually disabled, and lets him go without calling the police. No charges, no report, nothing. Peter watches this happen. He processes it. He understands immediately what it means. Being classified as intellectually disabled means he can get away with anything. From that point forward, Peter does not use his diagnosis to get support or help or accommodations. He uses it as a shield. He walks into a church service and interrupts it by throwing Bibles at people. He kicks open the stall doors in a women's bathroom while women are inside. He says things he would not normally be permitted to say in professional and public settings. Every time someone objects or tries to hold him accountable, the disability classification is the reason nothing happens to him. He is not doing these things because he cannot help himself. He is doing them because he figured out that the diagnosis gives him cover. There is a difference between a person who behaves in harmful ways because they genuinely cannot understand the consequences, and a person who understands the consequences perfectly well and uses a medical label to avoid them. Peter is the second person. He figured out the loophole within hours of receiving the diagnosis and has been running it ever since. Then he accidentally burns Lois. While testing the limits of what he can get away with, Peter tries to steal a deep fryer from a fast food restaurant. The theft goes wrong. He spills hot grease on Lois, burning her severely enough that she is hospitalized. With Lois in the hospital and Peter classified as intellectually disabled, Child Protective Services removes the Griffin children from the home. An agent named Jessup determines that Peter is not fit to care for the children on his own and places them in foster care. Cleveland takes custody of the Griffin kids.
Brian tells Peter that if he wants his children back, he needs to demonstrate to the court that he is a capable and responsible parent. This is a straightforward legal process. Peter needs to show up, behave well, and make a genuine case for why his children should be returned to him. Peter's plan is to frame Cleveland for running a prostitution operation. He brings 7 prostitutes to Cleveland's house. 7. His logic is that if Cleveland, the man currently fostering his children, appears to be involved in criminal activity, the court will remove the children from Cleveland's custody and return them to Peter. He is not trying to prove he is a good father. He is trying to make Cleveland look like a worse option. The plan does not work. Agent Jessup sees through it immediately. Cleveland, to his credit, orders Peter and 5 of the prostitutes out of his house, keeping 2, which the episode uses as a quick joke about Cleveland's own character. But the point is that Peter's strategy for getting his children back was to commit additional crimes and frame an innocent man for them. Framing a person for a crime they did not commit is obstruction of justice.
Arranging for prostitutes to appear at someone's home with the intention of creating false evidence against them is evidence tampering. These are not minor charges. They are serious criminal offenses that carry significant prison time in Rhode Island and under federal law. Peter is not doing this out of confusion or limited understanding. He is doing this strategically. He identifies a goal, get the kids back. He identifies an obstacle, Cleveland has the kids, and he designs a plan to remove the obstacle through manufactured criminal evidence. That is premeditated. That is deliberate. That is a man who knows exactly what he is doing. The court hearing does not go well for Peter. He makes his case. He loses. The judge denies his petition for custody and rules against him. Peter barely avoids imprisonment, and the episode reveals why he avoids it in a way that is funny and also genuinely disturbing. The judge forgets that prisons exist. The judge outright states on the record in open court that Peter is a monster. Not just intellectually limited, a monster. A judge sitting in a legal proceeding, having reviewed the facts of the case, uses the word monster to describe Peter Griffin. This is not the audience's interpretation. This is not reading between the lines. This is the show putting those words in the mouth of the person whose job it was to evaluate Peter's conduct and determine what it means. The judge calls him a monster, and then does not send him to prison because he forgets prisons exist. This is the show doing something interesting and worth paying attention to. It acknowledges, through an official, authoritative voice inside a legal proceeding, that Peter Griffin's behavior crosses a line that most people in the show dance around naming. Everyone else in Peter's life tends to normalize what he does, absorb it, forgive it, or move past it. The judge does not do any of that. The judge looks at the full picture of what Peter did: the disability exploitation, the hot grease burning Lois, the framing of Cleveland, the 7 prostitutes, and calls it what it is. Then, a plot convenience saves Peter and the episode ends. Lois walks in fully recovered. She has custody of the kids. Everything resets. Peter goes home. The judge's words dissolve into the background noise of a show that always finds a way to return to the starting position. But the starting position now includes a judge who called Peter a monster on the record. A man who used a medical diagnosis as a crime-committing tool within 48 hours of receiving it, and a documented attempt to frame an innocent person through manufactured criminal evidence. Petarded is often remembered as one of Family Guy's funniest episodes. IGN ranked it the best episode of the entire series in 2014, celebrating its comedy and its musical numbers and its sheer audacity. That ranking is not wrong. It is a genuinely funny episode. But funny and criminal are not opposites. The same episode that made millions of people laugh also showed Peter Griffin exploit a disability diagnosis, burn his wife with stolen kitchen equipment, lose custody of his children, attempt to frame his neighbor for a crime, and get called a monster by a judge. All of that is in the same episode. The laughs do not cancel the crimes. They just make them easier to sit with. Which, when you think about it, is exactly how Peter Griffin has gotten away with everything else on this list. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The exploitation of a disability diagnosis to avoid legal consequences is bad.
Framing an innocent man is worse. But there is a category of crime in Peter's record that makes both of those look like minor offenses. One that involves not just one victim, not just one family, but an entire town, a drug supply, and a decision that Peter made in a basement while his family watched and said nothing. Section 8. Methamphetamine Manufacturing and Distribution. There is a moment in Season 11 of Family Guy where Peter Griffin stands in a basement, looks at a methamphetamine lab, and makes a decision. Lois is standing right next to him. She tells him they should call the police. She says it clearly. She means it. She is right. Peter says no. Everything that follows from that moment, and a great deal does follow, is a direct result of Peter choosing, in full awareness of what he was looking at, to cook and sell illegal drugs instead of doing the single most obvious and correct thing available to him, which was to pick up a phone. Season 11, Episode 20, Farmer Guy. It aired on May 12, 2013, and it is the episode where Peter Griffin becomes a methamphetamine manufacturer and drug dealer. Not by accident, not through a misunderstanding, through a deliberate choice made in a basement on a farm in front of his wife and children. Here is how it starts. Crime is rising in Quahog. The Griffins come home one day to find their house has been robbed. Everything is gone. Peter, shaken by the robbery and convinced that Quahog is no longer safe, makes a unilateral decision. He is moving the family to a farm. He sells the house on Craigslist. He tells the family they are leaving. There is no discussion, no vote, no consideration of what anyone else in the family wants. Peter decides, and the family goes. Brian is suspicious from the beginning. He briefly takes Stewie hostage as a bargaining chip because he is concerned that being taken to a farm is a euphemism for something worse. This is a dog holding a baby at gunpoint because he does not trust his owner's motives, which is a sentence that only makes sense in the context of this show, but also accurately describes what happens. The family arrives at the farm and tries to adjust. Farm life is hard. Money runs out fast. Lois tells Peter they are losing money and in danger of losing the farm entirely. The family is in genuine financial trouble with no obvious way out. Then a tornado hits. The family takes shelter in the storm cellar beneath the farm. When the tornado passes and they look around the cellar, they find it is not just a storm shelter. It is a fully equipped methamphetamine laboratory. Someone built a meth lab under the farm at some point before the Griffins arrived. The equipment is there, the materials are there, everything needed to manufacture and distribute illegal drugs is sitting in the basement of the farm Peter just moved his family to. Lois says they should call the police. Peter says no. His reasoning, as much as Peter's reasoning can be called that, is that the meth lab is the solution to their money problem. They are broke. The farm is failing. Here is a ready-made operation that could make them profitable. Peter looks at a drug manufacturing facility and sees a business opportunity. He convinces Lois to go along with it, just long enough to get back on their feet, just until they have enough money to stabilize the farm. That is the deal he makes with her. The family starts cooking meth. Peter develops a distribution system using carrier pigeons. He builds a network for getting the product out to buyers through birds carrying packages across Quahog. Stewie, the infant, is sent out to buy pseudoephedrine, which is a cold medicine ingredient used in manufacturing methamphetamine, from pharmacies. Using a child to acquire drug manufacturing materials is a separate federal offense from the manufacturing itself. It does not matter that Stewie is a fictional character in an animated show. The act the show depicts is an adult directing a minor to participate in drug acquisition for illegal manufacturing purposes. Brian goes to college to try to learn something useful about farming while all of this is happening. He comes back to find the farm and the family have completely fallen apart. Everyone is in their underwear. Meg is unconscious on the floor for reasons the episode does not fully explain. The operation has consumed the family. Then the news report airs. A news broadcast reveals that the Griffin family's drug operation has flooded Quahog with methamphetamine. Trisha Takanawa, the news reporter, is one of the people in town who has become addicted. Almost everyone in Quahog is on meth. The crime problem that Peter moved to the farm to escape has gotten dramatically worse because Peter is now the primary supplier of the drug fueling it. This is the part worth sitting with. Peter moved his family to the farm because he was scared of rising crime in Quahog. He was robbed. He felt unsafe. He wanted his family to be in a better place. And then, within a single season of television, he became the reason Quahog's crime problem exploded. The thing he was running from, he created. The fear that drove him out of his house, he turned into reality for every other family in the neighborhood. Lois sees the news report. She sees what their operation has done to the town. She packs everyone up, and they go back to Quahog. The show moves on. Now let us talk about what Peter actually did under United States federal law, because the crimes here are not small, and they are not ambiguous. Manufacturing methamphetamine is a federal felony under United States Code. The law does not require that you be running a large operation or that you be a professional criminal. Any detectable amount of methamphetamine manufactured by a person who does not have legal authorization to do so triggers a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in federal prison for a first offense. That is the floor, the minimum. The sentence goes up based on quantity, and Peter's operation was large enough to supply an entire city. Distributing methamphetamine adds another layer.
Manufacturing the drug and then getting it to buyers through a carrier pigeon delivery network is distribution. Distribution carries its own mandatory minimum sentence, again starting at 5 years and going up based on quantity and criminal history. Peter also used a minor in the operation. Stewie was sent to buy pseudoephedrine. Under United States law, using a person under 18 years old to assist in drug manufacturing or distribution is a separate federal charge that adds additional mandatory prison time on top of the base sentence. It does not matter that Peter may not have fully understood the legal implications. The act itself triggers the charge. The total picture of Peter's federal drug exposure from Farmer Guy alone, manufacturing, distribution, use of a minor in a drug operation, conspiracy, adds up to a sentence measured in decades. This is not an exaggeration or a dramatic stretch. These are the actual mandatory minimums that apply to the actual crimes the episode depicts Peter committing. And Peter did not stumble into this. He made a choice. He stood in that basement next to his wife, heard her say they should call the police, and said no. He was not confused. He was not acting impulsively in the heat of a moment. He looked at the situation, weighed his options, and chose to become a drug manufacturer because it seemed like the most convenient solution to a financial problem. That is premeditation. That is a deliberate decision with full awareness of what he was choosing to do. The fact that the show frames it as a Breaking Bad parody and plays it for laughs does not change the underlying structure of what Peter did or the legal category it falls into. The Breaking Bad comparison is actually worth dwelling on for a moment. Breaking Bad is a show about a man who makes meth and loses everything: his family, his health, his sense of self, his freedom. It is a tragedy built on the premise that the choice to manufacture and distribute drugs destroys you from the inside out, regardless of your original reasons for making it. The whole point of Breaking Bad is that there is no version of this story where it ends well. Family Guy uses the same premise as a comedic storyline that resolves in a single episode with no lasting consequences. Peter manufactures and distributes enough meth to addict most of a city, then packs up and goes home. And the next episode, he is back on the couch, watching television and arguing with Brian. No arrest, no federal investigation, no consequences for the people of Quahog who became addicted to drugs he supplied. No acknowledgement that any of it happened. The town that Peter flooded with methamphetamine returns to normal off-screen, and the show moves forward. That reset is the single most consistent feature of Peter Griffin's entire criminal record. Every section of this essay ends the same way. Peter does something serious, the episode concludes, and the next week, the slate is clean. The welfare fraud reset, the Pretoria invasion reset, the drunk driving reset. The meg abuse never resets because it is structural, but every individual incident resets. The disability fraud reset, the lobbying reset, and now the methamphetamine manufacturing resets. The crimes accumulate in the record. The consequences evaporate in the show. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, which makes what comes next particularly worth examining.
Because the next crime in Peter's file did not reset cleanly. It left a man in the hospital, nearly destroyed a friendship, and produced enough fallout that the episode had to address it across multiple storylines before it could pretend everything was fine again. Section 9. Arson. Burning down Cleveland's house. If you've been keeping track of what Peter Griffin has done to Cleveland Brown across the run of Family Guy, a picture starts to form. It is not a flattering picture. Cleveland is one of Peter's closest friends. He has been part of Peter's core group since the very beginning of the show. He was there at the Drunken Clam. He was part of the couch, the bar nights, the terrible decisions made in groups that somehow always end up being Peter's decisions made alone while everyone else watches. Cleveland is also the man Peter shot. And then, in the same episode, Peter burned his house down. Both of those things happen in A Shot in the Dark, Season 14, Episode 9, which aired on December 13th, 2015. The shooting was covered in Section 5, but the arson is its own crime, its own moment, and its own specific piece of evidence about who Peter Griffin is when he is trying to fix something he broke. Here is what happens after the shooting. Cleveland Jr. has been released from the hospital. The court case has ended. Peter stood up and publicly admitted he shot Cleveland Jr. Cleveland covered for him by claiming he shot his own son. The crowd dispersed, and the two men made something that looked like peace outside the courthouse. Cleveland acknowledged that Peter shot his son out of stupidity rather than hatred. Peter apologized. Cleveland Jr. accepted the apology, sort of, in the way teenagers accept apologies from adults who have wronged them, with the specific energy of someone who has not actually forgiven anything, but has decided to let it sit for now. The friendship between Peter and Cleveland is supposed to be repaired. That is where the episode leaves them publicly. But Peter cannot leave it alone. He decides to go to Cleveland's house to continue making things better. He brings a bottle of alcohol and 2 glasses. He brings cigars. He shows up at Cleveland's garden, where Cleveland is working, and presents these gifts as a peace offering. A way of saying the two of them should sit down together, share a drink, smoke a cigar, and let things return to normal. Cleveland does not want Peter there. He makes this clear. He tells Peter to leave. Peter does not leave. He pulls out the cigars and begins trying to light them as a way of forcing the moment into existence. If he can get the cigars lit and get drinks poured, maybe Cleveland will sit down and the repair can begin. This is Peter's idea of fixing a relationship. Not giving Cleveland space. Not accepting that the man whose son he shot might need more than a cigar and some whiskey to feel better. Showing up uninvited with gifts and refusing to leave until the other person agrees to be okay. He tries to light the cigars. One of them slips out of his hand. It falls directly into the open bottle of alcohol sitting between them. The alcohol ignites. A small fire starts on Cleveland's lawn. Peter's response to the fire is to grab a rag from Cleveland's pocket and stuff it into the neck of the burning bottle. He does this quickly, instinctively, because in Peter's mind, putting something in the bottle will stop the fire from spreading. What actually happens is that the rag catches fire and the bottle becomes a burning torch. The fire gets bigger. It gets onto the lawn properly now. Small fires are breaking out across Cleveland's grass and working their way toward the house. Cleveland's house catches fire. The structure sustains serious damage. The episode shows the house burning with the specific visual the show has used for this gag before. Cleveland falls out of his bathtub through the wall as the house collapses around him, which is a recurring visual joke in Family Guy tied to Cleveland. The house is on fire. Cleveland's home, the one he lives in with his wife Donna and his children, is burning because Peter came over uninvited, refused to leave, dropped a cigar into a bottle, grabbed a rag, and turned a small accident into a structural fire. Peter does not call the fire department. He does not do anything to control the blaze. He stands there and watches it. Under Rhode Island general laws, arson in the second degree covers the burning of the dwelling, the home, of another person. It carries a sentence of up to 20 years in prison. Rhode Island law on arson does not require that you intended to start the fire. It requires that your actions caused the fire and that you acted recklessly, meaning you were doing something that a reasonable person would recognize as creating a serious risk of this exact outcome. Dropping a lit cigar into an open bottle of alcohol while standing on someone's lawn and then making the fire worse by stuffing fabric into the burning bottle qualifies as reckless conduct. The outcome, a house fire, is a direct and foreseeable result of those specific actions. Peter did not plan to burn Cleveland's house down, but he created the conditions for it through a chain of careless decisions made one after the other in a very short period of time. The law does not require intent for arson charges when the reckless behavior causing the fire is this clear. There is also something worth noting about the timing. Peter did not start this fire randomly. He started it while attempting to make peace after shooting Cleveland's son. The same visit, the same afternoon, that was supposed to be about repairing damage, ends with more damage. Peter came to help and left Cleveland's house burning. This is a pattern that shows up throughout Peter's record and is worth naming directly. Peter's attempts to fix things consistently make things worse. The welfare fraud was supposed to be a temporary situation he would quietly resolve. It became a federal trial. The neighborhood watch was supposed to make Spooner Street safer. It ended with Cleveland Jr. in the hospital and a hate crime accusation on the news. The farm was supposed to protect the family from rising crime. It ended with Peter supplying the drugs driving that crime. And the visit to Cleveland's house after the shooting was supposed to begin the healing process. It ended with the house on fire. Peter is not just a man who does harmful things. He is a man whose corrections are as dangerous as his original mistakes. The harm he causes does not stop when he stops causing it intentionally. It keeps going because his attempts to respond to the harm are driven by the same impulsiveness, the same refusal to think ahead, the same certainty that his instincts are correct, even when they are catastrophically wrong. Cleveland's house burns in an episode that already contained the shooting of an unarmed teenager, the deployment of a corrupt legal defense that slandered a child in court, and the near destruction of a friendship. All of that happened in one episode. All of it traces back to a stolen outdoor couch. And the final crime of that episode, the one that caps everything, is a house fire started by a man who came over with alcohol and cigars to apologize for the shooting. The arson is not the most dramatic crime in Peter's file. It is not the one with the highest potential sentence or the most victims. But it might be the most revealing one, because it happens when Peter is actively trying to do the right thing. It happens when he is at his most genuinely motivated to repair something he broke. It happens on a day when Peter, by any reasonable reading, wanted things to go well. And a man's house burned down. That tells you something about Peter that the more obviously terrible crimes, the meth manufacturing, the shooting, the invasion, do not quite capture. Those crimes involve Peter making a choice. The arson involves Peter trying to be decent and failing so completely that the result is indistinguishable from the crimes where he was not trying at all. The damage Peter causes when he is trying to help is nearly as serious as the damage he causes when he is not paying attention. That gap between intention and outcome is where most of Peter's victims end up living. Cleveland Jr. is in it. The people of Quahog who got addicted to Peter's meth are in it. Meg has been living in it for 20 years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the next person on this list ended up there not because Peter shot something or burned something or declared war on something, but because Peter found out a secret, decided it was worth money, and used it until there was nothing left to use. Section 10. Blackmail. The Carter-Pewterschmidt Affair. There is a version of Peter Griffin that the show wants you to believe in. It is the version where Peter is fundamentally harmless, a big, loud, impulsive man-child who makes messes but means well. The version where his crimes are accidents, his cruelty is thoughtlessness, and his selfishness is just the natural output of a man who never quite grew up. That version falls apart completely in Season 10, because blackmail is not an accident. Blackmail is not impulsive. Blackmail is not thoughtlessness. Blackmail is a person finding out something damaging about someone else, calculating what that information is worth, and then using it as a weapon to extract money or favors over an extended period of time. It requires planning. It requires sustained dishonesty. It requires a willingness to cause ongoing harm to another person in exchange for personal gain. Peter Griffin does all of that, deliberately, over weeks. Season 10, Episode 16, Welcome Back, Carter. This is the episode where Peter discovers that his father-in-law, Carter Pewterschmidt, is having an extramarital affair. Carter is married to Barbara, Lois's mother. Carter is also one of the wealthiest men in Rhode Island. Peter catches Carter in the middle of the affair and is immediately put in a position most people would find genuinely difficult. He knows something devastating about a family member, something that would cause serious harm if it came out, and he has to decide what to do with it. Most people in that situation face a genuine moral dilemma. Do you tell the person being cheated on? Do you confront the person doing the cheating? Do you stay out of it entirely and protect your own peace? Peter's decision is none of those things. Peter agrees to stay quiet. He tells Carter he will not say anything to Barbara or Lois about the affair. He makes this agreement with Carter knowing full well that Carter has no real choice but to accept it. Carter is the one who got caught. Carter is the one with something to lose. And Carter knows that Peter is now holding information that could destroy his marriage. The agreement to stay quiet is not a kindness. It is the opening move in a blackmail operation. Peter immediately begins using Carter's secret to get things. A limousine, fine dining, access to expensive experiences that Peter could never afford on his own. Every time Peter wants something, Carter provides it, because Carter has no leverage and no way out. The affair is the sword hanging over every interaction between them, and Peter keeps it there, keeps it sharp, and keeps reaching for whatever he wants while it hangs. This goes on. Peter does not extract one favor and consider the debt paid. He keeps going back. The limo ride leads to more demands. The fine dining leads to more demands. Peter has found a source of unlimited access to Carter's wealth, and he uses it with the same thoughtless, bottomless appetite he brings to everything else in his life. Carter submits to all of it because the alternative is Barbara finding out. Barbara is Lois's mother. She is a woman who has built her life around her marriage to Carter.
Finding out that her husband has been having an affair would be devastating to her in a way that goes beyond the usual pain of that kind of betrayal. It would reframe years of her life, cast doubt on everything she thought was real, and leave her with a grief that has no clean resolution. Carter knows this. Peter knows this. Peter is using Barbara's potential pain as the mechanism of his blackmail. He is not threatening Carter directly. He is threatening Barbara indirectly, threatening to cause her enormous suffering as a way of forcing Carter to keep paying. Under Rhode Island law, blackmail is covered under the extortion statute. Rhode Island General Laws, Section 1142(2), makes it a crime to threaten to expose any secret about a person, any information that would subject them to public ridicule, harm their reputation, or damage their relationships, in order to obtain money or anything of value. The law does not require that the threat be made loudly or aggressively. A quiet understanding between two people, where one person knows the other has damaging information and provides benefits to keep it quiet, is extortion. It is a felony. It carries up to 10 years in prison. Peter's arrangement with Carter meets every element of that definition. He has damaging information. He uses it to obtain things of value: the limo, the dinners, the access to Carter's wealth and resources. The agreement between them is built entirely on the threat of exposure. That is extortion. That is blackmail.
executed quietly, over weeks, dressed up as a family arrangement, but blackmail nonetheless. The operation ends not because Peter chooses to stop, but because he cannot keep the secret. Peter accidentally reveals the affair to Barbara. The show does not dwell on how it happens with great precision, but the result is clear. Barbara finds out. The thing that Carter paid weeks of compliance to prevent happens anyway, because Peter, who was the only thing standing between Carter and exposure, could not maintain the deception. The secret gets out. Barbara is devastated. The harm that Carter feared and that Peter used as a weapon lands on Barbara anyway. Except now it lands with the additional weight of having been kept from her deliberately by her son-in-law. Peter collected weeks of luxury from Carter in exchange for protection that he ultimately could not deliver. Carter paid the blackmail price in full. Barbara got hurt anyway. And Peter walks away from the entire situation without consequence. This is the detail that separates the Welcome Back Carter storyline from most of the other crimes in Peter's record. A lot of Peter's crimes hurt strangers or acquaintances. The Quahog meth operation hurt people he did not know well. The shooting of Cleveland Jr. hurt a friend's family. The Pretoria invasion hurt a neighbor. Those are serious. But the blackmail of Carter directly harms someone Peter sees every week. Carter is Lois's father. Barbara is Lois's mother. These are the grandparents of Peter's children. Peter used the potential suffering of his children's grandmother as a financial tool. He held Barbara's pain in reserve, like a card he could play whenever he wanted something, and he played it repeatedly, over weeks, until he accidentally played it for real. There is also something worth noting about what Peter extracted during the blackmail. It was not just money. It was experiences and access, and the feeling of being treated as an equal by a man who has always looked down on him. Carter Pewterschmidt has never respected Peter. The show has established this across many seasons. Carter finds Peter embarrassing, beneath his family's social level, and generally unworthy of Lois. Peter knows this. Peter has always known this. The blackmail was not just about getting a limo ride. It was about forcing Carter into a position of compliance, making the richest,
Most powerful man in Peter's life do what Peter told him to do, give Peter what Peter wanted, and have no choice in the matter. The power dynamic was the point. The limo was the proof of it. Peter took something that should have been a genuinely difficult moral situation, discovering that a family member is betraying their spouse, and converted it into a personal enrichment scheme built on coercion. He did not think about Barbara once in that process. He did not think about Lois, who had a right to know that her father was betraying her mother. He did not think about Carter's children or the family's stability. He thought about what Carter's secret was worth to him personally, and he collected on it until the secret escaped anyway. The blackmail is quiet compared to the arson and the shooting in the meth lab. There are no explosions. Nobody goes to the hospital. The crime happens in conversations and favors and an unspoken agreement maintained through fear. But it is in some ways the most calculated thing Peter Griffin does across the entire show. It required him to think ahead, maintain a plan, and sustain a deliberate deception over an extended period of time. Peter is not always smart, but when there is something in it for him, he can be patient. He can be strategic. He can look at a situation, identify where the leverage is, and use it with a consistency and focus that he almost never applies to anything else. That is not a man who does bad things by accident. That is a man who does bad things on purpose, when the reward is large enough. The blackmail shows you who Peter is when he is thinking clearly, and who he is when he is thinking clearly is someone who will use another person's most painful secret as a personal ATM for as long as he can get away with it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which makes what comes next in this record particularly interesting. Because Peter's most sustained pattern of fraud is not a single operation or a single episode. It is a habit so embedded in how he operates that it shows up across multiple seasons
in multiple forms against multiple different targets. And it all points to the same conclusion about the kind of person Peter Griffin actually is when you strip away the laugh track. Section 11. Perjury, insurance fraud, and identity fraud. A pattern across seasons. Every crime covered in this essay so far has had a specific moment attached to it, a specific episode, a specific scene, a specific thing Peter did on a specific day that crossed a specific legal line. The welfare fraud happened in episode 1. The Pretoria invasion happened in season 2. The shooting happened in season 14. Each one has a date, a production code, a moment you can point to and say, there, that is where it happened. This section is different. This section is not about one moment. It is about a pattern so consistent across so many seasons that it stops looking like a collection of separate incidents and starts looking like a personality trait. Peter Griffin lies to institutions. He lies to government offices. He lies to courts. He lies to employers. He lies under oath. He pretends to be people he is not. He creates false paperwork, false identities, and false histories whenever the truth would be inconvenient. And he does it so regularly across so many years that the show treats it as background noise. Start with the false testimony. Not the congressional perjury from Mr. Griffin Goes to Washington, which was covered in Section 6. Go further back. Season 2, Episode 2. Peter Griffin, husband, father, brother. In this episode, a flashback establishes that Peter has a history of giving false accounts of himself and his actions to authority figures. The show builds a picture, across multiple early episodes, of a man whose first instinct, when caught or cornered, is to construct an alternative version of events and deliver it with complete confidence. The congressional perjury from Season 3 is the most dramatic example, because it happens in front of the United States Senate during a nationally watched proceeding. Peter gives false testimony at the 1991 Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. When his lies are exposed in front of the entire chamber, he does not apologize or try to correct the record. He starts screaming into the microphone until the hearing collapses. This is not a gray area legally. Giving false testimony under oath in a federal proceeding is perjury. It is a federal crime. It carries up to 5 years in prison per count. Peter committed perjury before the United States Senate, and his response to being caught was to make noise until everyone was too distracted to follow through on the consequences. That instinct, create chaos, escape accountability, shows up every time Peter is caught lying in an official setting. It is not panic, it is strategy. Make things loud enough and confusing enough that the moment passes before anyone can formalize the charges. It has worked for Peter his entire adult life. Now look at the insurance fraud. In a Season 2 episode, Peter fakes his own death to avoid paying a hospital bill. This is insurance fraud in its most direct form. In Rhode Island, insurance fraud is a felony. Using a false claim, including a false claim of death, to avoid a legitimate financial obligation to an insurance provider carries a sentence of up to 5 years. Peter does not just fail to pay the bill. He constructs a false identity of being dead, presents that false identity to the relevant parties, and uses it to make a debt disappear. This is also not Peter's only fake death. Across the show's run, Peter fakes or performs death-adjacent deceptions on multiple occasions for financial or legal purposes. The pattern is consistent. When money is owed and Peter does not want to pay it, death becomes an option he considers. Then there is the identity fraud. Season 2 contains an episode where Peter goes undercover at a high school. He creates a false identity as a high school student, a teenager, which Peter very much is not, and operates under that identity for an extended period. When the deception starts to unravel, he fakes his death under the fake identity. So in a single storyline, Peter commits identity fraud by creating a false persona, sustains that fraud across multiple interactions with real people, and then commits a second fraud by faking the death of the person he was pretending to be. Under federal law, identity fraud, knowingly using a false identity to deceive others, carries up to 15 years in prison. The specific provisions cover using false identification documents, using a false name and biographical information to obtain benefits or avoid consequences, and using the identity of a fictional person to deceive institutions. Peter does all of these things across the high school storyline. His employer deceptions deserve their own attention. In Mr. Griffin Goes to Washington, Peter lies to his boss, Mr. Weed, on the phone by telling him he was in a terrible plane crash and that his entire family had been killed. This is the excuse he uses for not coming to work. When he runs into Mr. Weed at the baseball game he was attending instead of working, he tells him that the man at the game was his identical twin brother. When that story becomes difficult to sustain, he tells Mr. Weed the next day at work that the plane crash turned out to be gas. 3 separate lies, 3 separate false accounts, delivered to his employer over the course of approximately 48 hours as a chain, each one building on the last to cover for the previous one unraveling. This is not a man who lies occasionally when pressured. This is a man who constructs complete alternative narratives and delivers them with confidence, updating them in real time as circumstances require. Providing false information to an employer to avoid work obligations is not a criminal charge on its own in most circumstances, but when the false information involves claiming people are dead, when Peter tells his boss his entire family has been killed, it crosses into making a false report, which in Rhode Island is a misdemeanor offense. Making a false report of a death, even to a private party rather than an emergency service, creates legal exposure because false death reports can trigger insurance investigations, welfare claims, and other legal processes. Peter does not think about any of that. He just says his family is dead because it is a convincing excuse and moves on. The Mort Goldman pharmacy burning is another piece of this pattern. The Wikipedia article on Peter Griffin's character notes that Peter is shown helping Mort Goldman commit insurance fraud by burning down his pharmacy. Peter participates in the deliberate destruction of a business property for the purpose of collecting insurance money. Arson for insurance purposes is one of the most serious forms of insurance fraud in Rhode Island law. It combines the criminal elements of arson, which, as established in Section 9, carries up to 20 years, with the additional criminal elements of fraud, conspiracy to defraud an insurance provider, and destruction of commercial property. Peter is not the primary actor in this crime, but he is a knowing participant, which makes him criminally liable as an accessory under Rhode Island law. The pattern across all of these incidents is the same. Peter encounters a situation where the truthful, legal path requires him to accept an inconvenient outcome, a bill, a consequence, an accountability moment, and he chooses the fraudulent path instead. Not because he cannot think of another way, because the fraudulent path is easier, and he has learned, across decades of doing this, that the fraudulent path usually works. He lied to the welfare office and kept the money for weeks before getting caught. He lied to his boss 3 times in 2 days and was almost fired, but ultimately survived. He faked his death to avoid a hospital bill and faced no lasting consequence. He gave false testimony before the United States Senate and escaped by making noise. He created a false teenage identity, lived under it, faked that identity's death, and walked away. The only time any of these frauds produced serious consequences was the welfare fraud in episode 1, and even that was resolved by a baby with a mind control device. What the pattern shows is not a man who makes isolated mistakes under pressure. It is a man who has developed fraud as a default operating mode, a first resort rather than a last one. When Peter needs to get out of something, his brain does not ask, "What is the right thing to do here?" It asks, "What story can I tell that gets me out of this?" And then he tells that story with complete commitment, with no visible guilt, and with a ready backup story prepared for when the first one stops working. This is the behavior of someone who has been doing this for a very long time and has never been meaningfully stopped. The fraud pattern matters as its own section in Peter's criminal record because it reveals something the more dramatic crimes, The shooting, the meth lab, the arson can obscure. Those crimes are big and visible. They have victims you can point to and damage you can photograph. The fraud crimes are quieter. They happen in phone calls and courtrooms and paperwork. But they show you the same Peter Griffin operating with more deliberateness, more calculation, and more consistency than almost anything else in his record. Peter does not just commit crimes when things go wrong. He commits fraud as a lifestyle.
And he has been doing it since before the show started. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. All of which makes the final section of this essay the most important one. Because the question this record raises, across 11 sections, across dozens of crimes, across 25 years of television, is not just what Peter did. It is why none of it ever stuck. Why a man with this record walks free every single week. And what that says about the show that built him that way. Section 12. The Karma Houdini Problem. Why Peter is never punished. Here is the final question. Not what did Peter do? That has been answered across 11 sections with specific episodes, specific dates, specific crimes, and specific laws that those crimes violate. The record is clear. The evidence is documented. The case, built purely from what the show itself put on screen across more than 2 decades, is about as solid as a case built from a cartoon can be. The final question is simpler and in some ways harder. Why does none of it stick? Peter Griffin has been tried in court and sentenced to prison. That happened in episode 1, and a baby broke him out using a mind control device. He has been arrested. He has been charged with a hate crime. He has had his children removed by Child Protective Services. He has faced a judge who called him a monster, on the record, in open court. He has been blockaded by the United States military. The legal system of Quahog, Rhode Island has reached out and grabbed Peter Griffin on multiple occasions across the show's run. And every single time, by the next episode, he is back on the couch. The fans of Family Guy have a name for this. They call Peter a Karma Houdini. The term comes from the idea of Harry Houdini, the famous escape artist who could get out of any trap, any chain, any locked box. A Karma Houdini is a character who escapes the consequences they deserve, the same way Houdini escaped physical restraints, repeatedly, completely, and in ways that should not be possible, but somehow always are. Peter is the most documented example of this in American animated television, but calling him a Karma Houdini is descriptive, not explanatory. It tells you what happens. It does not tell you why the show was built this way, what it costs, and what it means that millions of people watched a man commit federal crimes every week for 25 years and kept laughing. Start with the most basic mechanical reason Peter escapes consequences. Family Guy, like most animated sitcoms, operates on what writers call a reset structure. Every episode begins in roughly the same place. The family is in the house. Peter is on the couch or at the Drunken Clam. Whatever happened last week has been absorbed back into the status quo. This is not unique to Family Guy. The Simpsons does it, Bob's Burgers does it, almost every long-running animated comedy does it to some degree. The reset allows the show to tell any story at once without being trapped by the consequences of previous stories. The problem with Peter specifically is the scale of what gets reset. Homer Simpson does bad things. He is negligent, impulsive, occasionally cruel, frequently irresponsible. But the worst things Homer does tend to stay within a certain range. Embarrassing, harmful in small ways, sometimes genuinely damaging to his family's feelings and finances. The reset absorbs those things without too much strain. Peter manufactures methamphetamine and floods a city with it. Peter shoots an unarmed teenager. Peter burns down a man's house. Peter commits welfare fraud in the first episode and is sentenced to prison. These are not embarrassing moments or bad parenting decisions. These are federal felonies. The reset structure that works fine for Homer's bowling mishaps and Bart's pranks is carrying an entirely different weight when it is being applied to drug manufacturing and arson. The show knows this. That is the interesting part. Family Guy is not unaware that Peter's crimes are serious.
The show acknowledges it repeatedly, in The Judge calling him a monster in Petarded, in Death showing Peter the future consequences of his drinking in Friends of Peter G., in Cleveland confronting Peter outside the courthouse in A Shot in the Dark. The show keeps creating moments where the narrative pauses and says, "This is real, this matters, someone is genuinely hurt here." And then the reset happens and it stops mattering. This creates a specific and unusual dynamic between the show and its audience. When you watch Family Guy casually, Peter is funny. He's loud and ridiculous, and the situations he creates are so absurd that the comedy works. But when you watch it the way this essay has been watching it, cataloging the crimes, tracking the victims, following the legal implications, something shifts. The same scenes are still funny. The laugh track is still there. But underneath the comedy, there is a man with a record that would put most real people away for life, walking around free every week because the show needs him on the couch for next week's episode. The audience absorbs this without fully processing it because the show trains you to process Peter as a comedy character rather than as a person. This is what the laugh track does. This is what the cutaway gags do. This is what the reset structure does. They are all tools for managing the audience's relationship with what Peter actually is. And what he actually is, evaluated on the evidence, is someone who should have been imprisoned in episode 1 and whose freedom has been a legal fiction ever since. The most honest moment in the entire show about this dynamic is Seahorse Seashell Party, covered in section 4.
That is the episode where Meg stands up during a hurricane and tells her family the truth about what they are. She tells Peter he is a terrible father. She has the evidence. She has lived with the evidence her entire life. And the episode concludes with Meg choosing to go back to being the family's lightning rod, absorbing their dysfunction so they do not have to face it. The show frames this as Meg being noble. And within the show's internal logic, it is. She is sacrificing herself for the family's survival. But the episode also functions as a description of how the audience relates to Peter. The audience is in Meg's position. The audience sees what Peter does. The audience absorbs it. The audience keeps watching. And the show, like Peter himself, keeps going, because everyone around it has agreed not to make it face what it actually is. The petarded judge is the only character in Family Guy's entire run who refuses to play this role. He looks at Peter, reviews the full picture of his behavior, and says the word monster out loud in an official setting. Then he forgets prisons exist and Peter goes home. But the word was said. It is in the transcript of that episode. A sitting judge, in a legal proceeding, evaluated Peter Griffin and arrived at the word monster. That is the show telling the truth about its own main character inside a joke designed to make sure the truth does not land too hard. Here is the full record. Welfare fraud, federal felony, sentenced to prison in episode 1. Escaped via infant with mind control device. Drunk driving, multiple documented occasions, 1 fatal crash, 0 lasting legal consequences. Treason, military blockade, annexation of private property, resolved in under a week with no charges filed. Child abuse, sustained pattern across 20+ years, documented in hundreds of episodes, never prosecuted. Unauthorized discharge of a firearm causing bodily harm to a minor. Charges dropped. Friendship restored. Federal lobbying fraud on behalf of a tobacco company targeting children reversed at the last moment. No charges filed. Disability fraud and framing an innocent man for prostitution. Judge calls him a monster. Judge forgets to sentence him. Methamphetamine manufacturing and distribution sufficient to addict an entire city. Family moves back to Quahog. Show moves on. Arson of a residential dwelling. Happens during attempted reconciliation visit. Never addressed legally.
Blackmail of a family member over an extended period. Secret accidentally revealed anyway. No charges. Perjury before the United States Senate. Insurance fraud. Identity fraud across multiple seasons. 0 prosecutions. That is the record. Every item on it sourced from a specific episode. Every crime named after the actual law it violates. Every consequence documented. And then documented disappearing. Peter Griffin should be in prison. Not as a joke, not as a thought experiment, not as a provocative title for a video essay, as a straightforward conclusion reached by applying the actual laws of Rhode Island and the United States to the actual things Peter Griffin has done on screen across 25 years of television. The sentence he received in episode 1 was correct. Everything that came after it, every season, every episode, every crime that built on top of that original unpunished crime happened in the space that opened up when a baby pointed a device at a judge and Peter walked out of a courtroom he should have stayed in. Family Guy is a great show. It is funny in ways that very few shows manage. The characters are iconic. The format is genuinely innovative. None of that is in dispute here. But at the center of it, doing terrible things every week and walking away every time, is a man the show's own judge correctly identified in Season 4 as a monster. The comedy works because the consequences never come. The consequences never come because the show needs Peter on the couch next week.
And Peter stays on the couch because that is where the story requires him to be. Not because he earned it, not because the law allowed it, because a baby with a mind control device said so in 1999, and everything since has just been the bill that never got paid. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.